you for being here. My name is Nate Burt. I'm the founder of Silver Maple Strategies. I'll tell you a little bit more about me and my organization momentarily, but primarily I want to start by just acknowledging that today's conversation is the start of a series of discussions or workshops we're going to hold over the next few months that I hope will leave you walking away with some practical tips and insights for the projects that you're currently leading, for funding opportunities you may pursue in the future. And we're starting off in this place here today because it's really essential that we work on ourselves before we start to envision the outcomes and the impact that we can have down the road. I'm going to try to explain why I think that's so important. But having worked in this space for many years, I recognize that oftentimes we are so focused on the day-to-day of implementing a project or pursuing the next grant opportunity that we often lose track of the value that we bring, that you all bring as extension professionals, as people with outside expertise and knowledge, relationships, networks that can all be so beneficial in this work. So we're going to talk a little bit about analyzing and categorizing things like your experience, the talent that you get the privilege of working with, and the impact that you want to have to really optimize your efforts to seek out new funding and to implement successfully funded projects. So with that, I will go ahead and jump ahead to the next slide. And I'm married to a PhD educator, proud land-grant grad from the University of Missouri, and she's always sort of giving me feedback. And so one of those is that I should always start a presentation with some objectives. So here are 3 things I hope you're able to walk away from our conversation with today. You know, first of all, I really want to just reinforce why it's so important to step back from the day-to-day and think about the resources, the value that you and your colleagues can bring to any project or any grant opportunity or funding endeavor that you're working on. Secondly, I want to examine how to develop a process for, doing kind of analysis and self-examination. Again, not trying to get all touchy-feely, but there is real value in self-reflection as a means of going further faster, saving time, finding new insights that can really guide your work moving forward. And so we'll talk about some journaling exercises specifically that I think can be really valuable to you and your colleagues. And then finally, we're going to evaluate some low and no cost tools that can really help you not just go through these exercises and then forget about them, but actually document those things for yourself, right? Have those as templates that you can use again and again. Like Melanie shared at the beginning, I really want this to be interactive. So there are places throughout our program today where I'm going to ask you to type comments into the chat, or verbally, if you want to raise your hand. Melanie is going to be monitoring people who'd like to make a comment or ask a question. Again, this is for you, so I want you to feel empowered to ask. There are no stupid questions, and again, I want you to feel empowered to share things that you're learning from your own experience, recognizing that we're all here to get better together. So I'll tell you a little bit about me in one moment, but before we do that, let's start with this interactive piece. I want you to sort of think about yourself and the value that you bring as an extension professional. And in one word, which I know is difficult, right? Think about one word you would use to describe your professional superpower. If you were to list all the great things you're doing in your role or that you've done in your career, what is one word that best describes the talent or the value that you bring? And go ahead and drop that in the chat. And in just a moment, I'll give you a minute or two, and then we'll read a few of those out loud. And as I have my little chat bubble open, I'm seeing development, connector, calm, flexibility, visioning. I love that, being able to look out into the future and imagine a better world, empowerment, energy. I love that. It really takes a lot, as we'll talk about later, a lot of energy to keep the momentum going. The days can be difficult, right? There's a lot we have on our list. And so absolutely. Connecting to partners. I love the idea of working with people inside of Extension as well as outside of it that bring real value. Tenacity. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, so I could go on and on. These are fantastic. Someone says, yeah, I'm the finance person. Susan, finance people are critical to everything we're talking about today. So don't shortchange yourself. I love it. All right, that's great. Feel free to keep dropping in we can revisit those as we go throughout our conversation today. Let me give you just a quick synopsis of me so you know why in the world is this crazy guy from Missouri, taking an hour and 15 minutes out of your day. I have worked as a professional communicator for the last 15 years, also a land-grant grad at University of Missouri. I've served 2 consecutive terms on my what used to be my local extension council in Audrain County in Mexico, Missouri. Have since located a county over, but nonetheless remain very involved with extension and 4-H with my wife and I's 4 children. I've spent most of my career, the past decade, 10 to 12 years in food and agriculture. I worked at Farm Journal before I started my own consulting business a couple of years ago. And during my time at Farm Journal was working closely with the executive team to stand up the climate smart agriculture division of the company called Trust in Food. And so through that experience, had lots of opportunities to work with some incredible organizations, nonprofits, private sector, Fortune 500 companies, as well as farmers themselves to really implement education, outreach, programming in support of climate smart solutions for food and agriculture. So I'm going to skip this. This basically just tells you I've done a lot in communications and fundraising. I think it's a lot of fun, which is why I'm so privileged to be able to spend time with you today. I will not claim to be an expert in everything, but I will claim to have at least had some opportunities to get trials by fire, shall we say. All right, so let's dig into our material for today. I want to start by saying that there is value here, right? So our first learning objective was talking about sort of why is there value in stepping back from the day-to-day. You may be saying to yourself, Nate, I don't have time to step away for a cup of coffee, much less take time away to start, thinking about myself and asking all of these existential questions. And that's totally fair. However, I want to challenge you that there is real value, even if you're dedicating 5 or 10 minutes to some of these questions. But let's start, before we start getting into questions or things to ask yourself or your colleagues, let's talk about the value of unlocking your potential through an audit like what I'm describing. Again, I'm not talking about where the government or some other funder comes in and sort of looks at your books. For those who are financial folks in the crowd, those are really important, but that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about your skills, your talent, how you show up and make impact. Okay, so the first value that I've included on this screen here, I want to give props to my colleague Jade, who built all of these slides. Any wording or phrasing that's messed up is my fault alone. Jade did a great job of putting this information here, and Melanie will share these afterward. First of all, it helps you, doing an audit like this helps you identify resources that are often hidden to you. Maybe you worked with a colleague in the past, you've slept several times since then, you've done other projects, you've moved on, but they added real value. And if you could only surface that name or that experience again, you might be able to bring them back into new projects that you're working on. So first of all, we're putting things on paper or in video or in some format that allows us to consciously remember, hey, I have all of these great resources at my disposal. Again, this could be internal experiences, this could be external colleagues, this could be financial resources, in-kind resources, you name it. Everything is we're putting everything on the table and saying, okay, what do we have to work with? Secondly, again, putting things in writing, having actual physical evidence, whether it's in a digital file or in a notebook on your desk, the more you can have a ready reference, which we'll talk about some strategies for creating this later today, the more value it's going to bring you in the long term. The more you can templatize or repeat the process for, more success time and again. The next piece is that oftentimes when we're approaching a new project or a new funding opportunity, we don't have all the answers. I don't know about you, but sometimes I look at an RFP and I say, oh, where do I even begin, right? This is so complicated. This document is 90 pages. And that's before I've actually processed and understood everything. Then I actually have to come up with a defensible response to how my organization or my client is going to add value through this grant opportunity, for example. So this process of auditing the resources and unlocking your potential is all about not just what do I have today, but what gaps do I need to fill, right? So there might be a staff member or a part-time help assistant or something like that you'd love to have, provided you had the time of day to hire, to train them and the funding to support that position, right? There may be other opportunities where you say, hey, this proposal would be much stronger if I partnered with X organization, right? It might be another extension team, it might be a university, it might be a corporate partner. But you don't know those things until you get them in front of you and say, okay, where are the gaps? Where are the expertise areas that would really add value? And you may not have a name or an organization yet, but if you can at least identify this is the skill set or the type of information that we really need, then you can start brainstorming as a team and coming up with creative solutions to solve those gaps. One of the themes that'll run through our conversation today is that I want to remind you of who you are and the potential you bring to any project. The same goes for your team or the colleagues that you work with. And then secondly, there are always, almost without exception, multiple paths to get to the outcome you desire. And the more, again, the more materials you pull together and the more ideas you have at your disposal, the more paths you can feasibly create to get to where you want to go, whether it's for a funding opportunity or a current project you might be leading. A couple other items on this list, assembling the dream team, right? There are probably people you work with every day, people you gel with super well, you'd love to be a part of your project. There may be other people who perhaps it's more challenging to work with, but they bring some really unique skill sets. All of us are a spectrum of humanity, right? And so part of this exercise is thinking about the unique human characteristics, the talents, the expertise, the thought processes that go into doing a project that you want to bring to the table. And so this, again, this process lets you do all of those things. And then finally, clarifying possible paths, right? There may be hundreds of options for how to go forward, but really what you want to do is say, okay, of all of the options I could pursue, what are the 1 to 3 best options? And how do we start taking small actions that get us closer to that final proposal, that next milestone in the project, etc. Okay, so let's talk a little bit in practical terms, how to develop a process that starts with you as a leader within Extension. And again, I'm defining leader not as someone who's an executive per se, but someone who has a capacity to move specific pieces of a grant project forward or move a proposal forward or whatever it might be, right? Everyone is coming to this conversation from different perspectives, but you are a leader in the sense that you bring unique talent, background, insights, ideas, and network. And so all of those things are going to sort of come full circle here in this exercise. So I recommend journaling. Again, this doesn't have to be you sitting in a library somewhere with a cup of tea, spending hours in introspection. Although if you have the capacity to do that and you want to, I think that would be awesome. So please do. The rest of us may just have 5 or 10 minutes. Or if you really want to, get serious about it, dedicating 30 minutes or an hour in an afternoon on a, between milestones on a project or sort of while you're waiting on feedback on a grant. I think journaling is helpful whether you're doing it in writing or via, taking an audio memo on your phone or recording a video of yourself and getting a transcript later. The point is you're documenting sort of the insights and the value that you can bring to a specific project. I think it's really important to keep in mind that when you're journaling, in this context that we're talking about today of doing, unlocking your potential, it's really helpful to journal on each of these topics. And I'll give you some examples of prompts you could consider with a specific project or funding opportunity in mind. So what I'm suggesting is rather than saying, here's all the great experience I have, that's awesome. What's more helpful in the case of, you're a busy professional, you have specific grants in mind, you have specific projects that you're leading, think about a project that's really weighing on you, right? It could be something you're really excited about or something that you're really struggling with. And then think about experience, talent, and impact in light of that specific need in your personal or professional life, right? And here we're probably talking about a professional. So let's start with experience, right? I think experience is an important part of this auditing process, this unlocking your potential process, because it helps you, it reminds you of the kinds of insights and expertise that you bring to the table or that your colleagues bring. And a couple of prompts I recommend. I'm not going to stop to do these prompts today. I will have one in a moment for all of us to work on together. But these are just some things you can work on in your own time. On the left here, you see what are 2 or 3 successes from past projects like the one you're working on now, right? Remember, pick one project that you really want to make some progress on. What are some successes in the past that I could apply to this current opportunity, right? So for example, if you're working on a proposal from for an RFP from NEFA, for example, or NRCS, or the Department of Energy. Um, it's a valuable thing to say, okay, when have I done projects for those agencies in the past? Or have I worked with other organizations that have similar values and I've learned some things along the way that I could take and apply to this new project? Um, really dial back and think about, creatively, not just grant funded projects, but other things you're doing in your day-to-day work life, or hobbies that you have, or volunteerism that you've done. How could those experiences inform something that you're working on today? The second thing, which is I think is both hilarious and totally appropriate, is to think about one thing you promised yourself you'd never do again. I don't know about you, but I sometimes have a lot of regrets, especially when I learn something as part of a project or a proposal I've developed, and I say, you know what, I'm never doing that again, right? The experience was terrible. It wasted a ton of my time, or it made people really upset. And if I'd handled it differently, we could have made more progress more quickly with people's feelings and persons still intact and whole. There's likely things you've learned not to do. And so I want to encourage you to pull those things up as well, right? This is as much about what to say no to as it is about what to say yes to. And so I think it's both a fun exercise to say, look, if I'm doing a new project or going after new funding, I'm not going to do these things because that will open other doors that are more healthy, more productive, better for my team, and ultimately better for the outcomes for society that we're seeking to deliver through this project. So that's experience. The second set of prompts that I recommend thinking about, and again, this is not an exhaustive list of questions by any means, but hopefully it sparks some ideas. Talent is important because, okay, now we're going from all the things I've learned from trial and error and doing past projects. Now you're going to say, okay, what things am I really good at? What things are my colleagues and people in my network really good at that could add value to this project or opportunity I'm currently focused on? First of all, what types of expertise do you need to successfully set up and implement this project or this proposal, right? At this stage, you're not thinking about specific names of people or starting to worry about whether, person X, Y, and Z are going to be available to help you because they're already so overloaded with work. Those are all really important, very human-centered considerations, and I encourage you to think about them in turn. But at this stage, you're really just identifying a list, right? Make it as easy for yourself as possible to say, okay, these are the kinds of experts I need on my team, right? I need someone in finance. I need a project manager because I don't have time to manage all of this day to day. I need someone who has expertise in, from my agriculture background, climate smart practices or water quality issues or whatever the case might be, family nutrition, all of these kinds of things. Just make a list, right? And then secondly, on the right-hand side of your screen here, then you start to think about, okay, who do I know? Who could I feasibly collaborate with? That would be an excellent resource for me, right? It might be you, yourself, and I. It might be someone in your office. It might be someone across the country. It might be someone you've never worked with before, and asking them could feel like a real stretch. But go ahead and put their name down anyway, along with a little detail about what they could bring to the project. Again, at this stage, you're just thinking creatively. Too often, we limit ourselves because we view ourselves as less than capable when we're actually very capable. Or we say, well, that could never happen because, and then we fill in the blank. Leave yourself open to the possibilities. And recognize that, in theory, I suppose you could sit there and say, well, I'm committing all these people to dozens of hours of extra work. There's no way this will ever work. And before you know it, you're sort of spiraling down the rabbit hole of, cataclysm, right? This is never going to work. Why do I even bother? Why did I show up today, right? But focus on just getting those names down and the things they could bring, and then describe the job that each of them could do, right? Because just because someone has project management experience doesn't mean they might not have to modify that a bit or reimagine what project management looks like in the context of the grant opportunity you're pursuing, for example. So just think creatively and try to get as many of those ideas down. There doesn't have to be a rhyme or reason to it. As long as you have a record you can go back to and think through as you're pursuing the next steps of that proposal or opportunity. And then finally, perhaps most importantly, I've put together a couple of prompts here to get you thinking about impact, right? at the end of the day, you as extension professionals are really thinking about how do I add value to my local community? I understand my local community. I understand the needs that they have and the challenges and the ways that extension can equip them with education, insights, resources, research to really make their lives better, whether that's personally or in business or in a community. And so, really spend some time getting clarity on this specific opportunity, whether it's a grant or a current project. How is the world going to be better if we're successful in moving this forward? Whether that's reaching the next milestone of our project, or securing funding for this new opportunity. Those are really important because when the going gets tough, as it often does day to day, those are the kinds of things you can look back on and say, you know what, this is why I became an extension professional. This is why I'm doing this project. This is why I know that if I stick with it, if my team sticks with it, and we have energy, that's a word I saw in the chat earlier, if we maintain energy, we can be successful at this, right? So this is really as much about sort of rallying yourself and rallying your colleagues to remember the great potential inside of you, as it is to sort of, casting a wide vision for all the great things you're going to do in the world. That's really important, but it starts with each of you. The second piece here, this is something I learned from my business coach, Ed Gandia, key indicators of progress. One of the biggest challenges that I see people struggling with in grants or multi-year projects in general is that it becomes very easy to tie all of your success to specific milestones or deliverables. So for example, I will know my project is successful because we did 5 workshops and we interacted with 100 people in my community and we, delivered our progress report to our funder on time and we got all of our financials in so we could get paid. Those are great and obviously essential to the success of your grant. However, it does not get to the deeper meaning behind what you're doing, nor does it give you the kind of internal drive and momentum to be successful and resilient over the long term. So I want you to keep those deliverables in mind as important. And then I want you to adopt and think about this idea of key indicators of progress. So for example, a key indicator of progress might be, I'm noticing that the more we spend time thinking about our potential and documenting it, the easier our conversations become. The more value we see in one another on this project team because we more readily understand who I can turn to for help on a specific issue. Another example might be it's becoming easier to look at all the metrics that we're collecting, all the data that we're collecting on a project, and identify the 3 pieces of data that are telling us whether we're headed in the right direction. It's becoming more fun and rewarding. Like I'm looking forward more often than not to hopping on a call with my team because I can see the change that we're making. Those are the kinds of key indicators I'm talking about. They're more subtle, they're more nuanced, but nonetheless, they are essential to, again, maintaining success and again, recognizing your full potential. Part of that is just the human being you are, how you show up, the kindness, the compassion, the empathy, the questions that you're asking. All of those things are critical to your success. So don't overlook those when you think about impact. And then finally, going back to this idea of remembering the past as an indicator of future success. We know the world around us is changing rapidly, right? Technology is changing. The needs of our communities is changing. At the same time, there are some things that don't change. And part of what you've done throughout your career, whether it's been extension, all of your career, whether you come from other backgrounds and have since joined as an extension professional, it's really important to define in writing or via video or recording, like what are things I've done in the past or my team has done in the past that illustrate our ability to be successful in this kind of work, right? I'm applying for a climate change grant, right? I want to look back at past either climate grants or conservation focused initiatives or work with communities on resilience planning. And I want to look at those and say, you know what, we were able to be successful. Here are some of the things we learned. And I know that whenever I look at those examples, it's going to remind me that I can do this, that we can work together and do this. Again, it may sound sort of like frilly lace and that kind of thing, and it may seem to lack substance, but I assure you, what you're doing is reinforcing the things that you tell yourself. I really like to recommend the book Soundtracks by John Acuff. Again, it's called Soundtracks by John Acuff. I am not getting paid to endorse that book, but I have found it to be one of the most practical guides to rethinking the things that go on in your head every day, both for professional settings and personal ones. And if you read that book, one of the things you'll notice is that the stories that we tell ourselves, which he describes as soundtracks, I think Brene Brown is the one who coined the phrase "the stories we tell ourselves." Um, you're going to recognize that some of those are really healthy and productive, and many of them probably are not and may need to be reframed or tossed out on their ear. So again, part of this journey, this exercise of this process is to start thinking in the right direction to prepare yourself for the drive, the momentum, the longevity that it's going to take, whether you're working on a grant proposal on a very short turn. Again, it's not a really spatially long time frame, but nonetheless, it can feel like an eternity if your heart isn't in it, right? And so the goal of this exercise is to really get your heart in it, get those practical skills and people documented, and then move forward. Okay, I've talked a lot. I want to get into an interactive section. So I'm now going to actually give you a prompt I want you to think about and respond to. So here's the exercise. I don't want you to type anything in the chat yet. I will tell you when you have the thumbs up to do that. So we've talked about experience, talent, and impact. And what I want you to do is think about each of these categories, right? And I want you to think about something you bring in each of these areas, right? It could be a key experience. So for example, experience, I've worked on lots of 6-month pilots, so I'm ready for this next opportunity. It could be talent related, right? Talent, I have 10 or more years of grant writing experience. That could be a really powerful thing for fundraising or building new opportunities for your extension team. And then finally, think about impact, right? So that could look like impact, I've helped more than 500 students via our projects. Again, it can be you may feel some resistance to this exercise because it can feel like bragging. But what I want you all to see is that you as extension professionals have a tremendous wealth and depth of experience, knowledge, and perspective. So jot these down. I'm going to give you about 3 to 4 minutes here. Write down some thoughts about how you bring experience, talent, and impact. One example each. And then in a moment, I'm going to ask you to drop those in the chat all at once. And you're going to pick one, right? You might like the experience example or the impact example. But we'll do that in a moment and just see what comes up for you. So I'm going to pause. We'll take about 3 minutes, and then we'll come back and take a look at what you wrote down. All right, about 30 seconds left to jot down those ideas, and then I'll invite you to drop them in the chat here in just a moment. If you've already dropped it in, that's totally okay, by the way. We'll take a look at those in a minute. All right. So we've had about 3 minutes to spend time thinking through these areas, right? Experience, talent, and impact. Go ahead if you haven't already and drop your favorite line. Pick one into the chat. I'm going to take a look at those and maybe read a few of them out here. Um, Let me just scroll down here. Ooh, let's see here. Richard writes 20 years communication in youth. Love that. That's awesome. Um, Oh, let's see here. I see past work in youth programs. Adriana, thank you. Nesma worked on 8 funded projects last 2 years. That's amazing. Roseanne, experience. Uh, Obtained two grants as a postdoc. Fantastic. 6 years experience in international agriculture. These are fantastic. Ooh, impact. 1,500 youth reached every year through programming. Love that. That's awesome. That's very specific. I love the detail. Um, Designing and implementing entrepreneurial training cohort for veterans. That is super cool. And I love the diversity of the kinds of work you all are doing. I think that's really, again, that speaks to the diversity, the power of what Extension brings to the table each and every day, and it's easy to overlook that. Able to connect stakeholders and funders. I love that, Reagan. Thank you. Zane consulted on 3,000 to 4,000 acres per year. That's awesome. Okay, so I would love to read all of these. And please feel free to scan through those and read them. This is fantastic. I am going to drop into the chat that book that I mentioned earlier. It's called Soundtracks by John Acuff. So again, great resource. Always happy to make a book recommendation. I'm definitely a nerd in that area, but hopefully that's helpful. And I hope this exercise was helpful to you as well. Again, just seeing all the things you've done, right? The experiences you bring to the table, the talent that you and your colleagues bring to bear for people in your local communities, really custom tailored to meet their needs. And then the actual literal, like not figurative, not, visioning things 5 or 10 years out, but the actual measurable, quantifiable impact you're having. The value of that should not be understated. Okay, so we're going to transition now because we have a lot of material left and about 35 minutes or so to go in our, maybe a little more than that, 40 minutes to go in our session today. I want to take you to that third learning objective I mentioned earlier, which is thinking about some low or no cost tools or strategies that may make this process of unlocking your potential a little bit easier and especially replicable, right? This is going to require some work, right? It's not necessarily fun for some people to think about, like, this is embarrassing, or like, I don't really have any great talents, or I'm just doing my job. Like, yes, that's awesome. I'm proud of you. I think you should be humble. That's a great quality and character trait. And you do have a lot to offer. So sometimes this takes time to start thinking in new ways and unpacking those values that you and your colleagues bring to projects. So I'm going to give you 3 tools that I think can be particularly helpful. I found them to personally be useful. And you can take them and run with them. You can take them and throw them in file 13. It won't hurt my feelings either way, but hopefully you'll find something practical there. Okay, so the 3 things we're going to talk about. Number 1 is the PARA method. This comes from an author named Tiago Forte, which I'll drop his name in the chat momentarily. The second is standard operating procedures, or SOPs. Again, that may be extremely familiar. The other 2, not so much. The third method or the process or the tool is called the camcorder method. I think all of these 3 work really nicely together. Some may be more relevant than others to you, depending on the grants you're working on or the projects you're actively leading. But at any rate, I'll throw them out there and you can take them for what you will. So the PARA method that I mentioned is, let me just drop this in the chat here while I am thinking about it so I don't forget. The author and blogger that this comes from is Tiago Forte. He wrote a book called Building a Second Brain. I will be honest and say I have not read his book, but it's gotten good reviews. The premise that Tiago often writes about is this idea that simple organizational systems can actually put us further ahead and take all the great insights and knowledge that are living inside of you and document them so that not just you benefit, but everyone that you're collaborating with benefits as well. The para method is basically a method for organizing your files, your documents, your resources, so that it's easy to access personally and to share with others. And there are 4 folders he recommends creating. And again, I will be honest and say that I'm working on trying to implement this methodology. If you were to look at my Dropbox today, I have dozens of folders for all of my, projects and client work, et cetera, et cetera. So, you may take pieces and parts of this, but not the whole thing. Again, the idea is sort of an elegant, simple way of organizing things so you can find them readily and continue to document the value, the potential that you and your team have, and then draw on that again and again for each new opportunity so you're not having to come up with it from scratch every time. The 4 folders Tiago recommends are projects. So basically, if you were to say, I'm working on a nutrition grant, you would have a folder for that. If I'm working on something that's climate smart related, I might have a folder for that. Again, any individual project, which I think he and others define as like a project is something with 2 or more tasks involved, that could be considered a project. Now, obviously, a grant is much more complex than that, but at any rate, you get the idea. You're capturing things that you're going to be working on for an extended period of time, whether it's pre-award or post-award. Second, areas is really like, okay, what are the various functions within your extension office or within your team? It could be things like, human resources, like our staff bios, for example, which, as you all know, when you're putting together a grant proposal, typically they want some biographical information. It could be things like job descriptions. Maybe you're hiring a contractor for a project or looking at fellows. I've had the privilege of serving as a climate fellow with the Extension's Climate Priority Action Team. So I wanted to put a plug in for them. If you're not already working with the Climate Priority Action Team, definitely encourage you to check that out. Doing some really exciting work. But again, that would be an example of if they were hiring a fellow or trying to recruit someone to partner with, that might be a great place to put in human resources. There might be a marketing bucket for all of the resources about how we talk about projects or the kinds of messages we share once a grant is successfully funded, those kinds of things. Resources is basically, standard operating procedures, helpful links that you've compiled for, funding portals that you might want to have ready access to. Again, you may use your internet browser or something else to keep track of all of those resources, but your resources folder, whether you're using Google Drive or Dropbox or whatever system you might use, Microsoft, those are the kinds of things you put in resources, basically ready references to return to again and again. And then archives is whenever you finish a project, done, it's shipped, you've done all of your final reporting and invoicing, you would move folders from project to archives so you don't lose it, but you're also not keeping it top of mind constantly because that one's done. You can celebrate that. When Melanie shares the slides, you'll see that there are some logos like this throughout the presentation, like this little laptop with the globe on it. You can click on that and it will take you to some more recommended reading or resources about each of these points. And this one, I think, leads you to a blog post that talks more about this para concept. Okay, let's look at the second tool, SOPs, or standard operating procedures. So this is one that is probably familiar to many of you, if not most of you. Basically, the idea of an SOP is that you are thinking through, and this takes time, thinking through steps to follow that you can repeat again and again for routine kinds of activities that you do. So for example, it could be how we look for grant opportunities on a specific topic or with a specific impact in mind. We go on grants.gov, we look in this specific place, we talk to our colleagues who are working in climate or nutrition or whatever it might be across the United States. We hold a staff meeting to brainstorm, the kinds of things we'd like to be doing with future grants. And you're documenting that process so that you're not having to think through all of those steps in the future because our brains can only hold so much. There is a future in this workshop series. We're going to talk about generative AI, topic I'm sure many of you are thinking about, some with joy, some with dread, many of us probably somewhere in between. We'll talk about that later in this series, but again, ChatGPT or another tool like that can be a great way to start taking what's in your head and organizing it in a useful format for you to follow, again, those SOPs, those standard procedures again and again. It's also a great resource for those of you who are in a management position or a leadership position to be able to communicate clearly with someone. There's absolutely value in training and hands-on types of things, but an SOP is a great takeaway after a training session, for example, to say, we talked through this today, we've gone through the steps, maybe you've demonstrated it either in person or virtually, these are the things we follow, you've answered questions. The SOP is really the synthesis, the summation of what you've discussed. And it's something you can refer people back to again and again. You know, go back to the SOP and check out steps 4 through 8. That'll answer that question. Or, you know, take a look at these steps and let me know if something is still unclear, and I'm happy to help. You know, depending on the makeup of your team or your partners, some of these things may be immediately apparent, and some of us just need more. I know I often need to review a process several times before it gels in my head. So again, this is also a time-saving mechanism for you and for your team to be able to have, again, those processes documented. And again, over here on the right, some resources for you to peruse at your leisure. The final method is basically SOP 2.0. This is something that comes from author Dan Martell. Buy Back Your Time is the book that he wrote. This is a book by a software entrepreneur. And so as an extension professional, you might be saying, what in the world value is that going to do for me? What I like about that book is that it really captures very practical steps that you can follow to begin. And again, budgets are always going to be a limitation, right? Time is always going to be a limitation. But the premise of the book is that there are ways, even small ways, like this camcorder method I'll describe in a moment, that you can start delegating either to a person or to technology, or streamlining your processes to buy back your time so that you can add that value that we established at the beginning of our workshop today, right? If you're going to show up with that expertise, make the impact you want, you know, remember your full potential, you've got to have time and brain power to focus on those things. And so Buy Back Your Time is all about a process. And again, he's primarily writing to an audience of business entrepreneurs. But those same principles can apply to you know, coaching and training and mentoring within an extension office or organization. So basically the camcorder method works really well, especially if you work with anyone virtually. I know many of us, including myself, do lots of Zoom meetings or Teams calls. We're trading documents back and forth all the time. And so basically what this is that if there is a task you're doing on a desktop computer in particular, how do I send follow-up emails to our funding partners? Or, you know, how do we build the newsletter that keeps our partners apprised of progress, or whatever it might be? You're basically recording a video of yourself doing those steps. You're sort of giving a voiceover. It's like ESPN for nerds. You're talking through each of those things that you're doing and sort of showing them the play-by-play as you're clicking on buttons and typing things in. Again, this can sound super tedious, so I'm not suggesting that you personally need to do this, but if there's someone on your team who's an expert at a certain software platform, or getting your projects for grant writing organized for success, or whatever it might be, the more you can document that via video format, it opens up all kinds of avenues. For example, you can then, you know, have a transcription tool take that audio from the video and turn it into a written standard operating procedure. And then, of course, have a team member edit it, double check things, make sure it reads nicely, etc. Again, the idea is basically with all three of these tools, the para method for organizing your files, the camcorder method for recording yourself, walking through processes and helping with training. It means you don't have to do everything live, right? So lots of us have calendars that are full of back-to-back meetings. So the camcorder method frees you up, right? You're recording something once that in theory you can use again and again with colleagues, and where it makes sense to document specific ways you do things. You could also talk about the values that your extension team has, right? These are the kinds of grants we pursue because it leads us to these outcomes. These are the kinds of grants we don't pursue, and here's why. So this doesn't just have to be some procedural, you know, laundry list of 101 steps to, you know, update your funder on progress. It could also be our values, what I believe in value as an extension leader. Like as a part of this team, here's why it's so important that people who work here, you know, bring their best diverse perspectives to the table. You know, it can be also just sort of simple things like that sound simple maybe, but are very powerful in terms of the resonance it has inside of your colleagues and the fact that you can, again, train and teach that at scale. Okay, so we've talked about some of these tools. Let me give you some closing thoughts, and then we're going to open up the floor for some conversation. How do you know if all of this work, right? Evaluating your impact, your talent, your expertise, doing these journaling prompts, using some of these tools to actually develop a process that you can repeat again and again as you have new grant opportunities, as you hit new project milestones. How do you know if it's even worth it, or are you just wasting your time? Here are some examples. We talked earlier about key indicators of progress, and these are some things that I think you can potentially look for. The first of all is that you immediately begin connecting dots the next time you look at an RFP, right? So because you've taken the time to invest in yourself, to lay out your potential, whether in writing or via video or via conversations with your team or colleagues, you can more quickly begin to connect the dots and say, oh, this reminds me of Project A, or oh, we've really been wanting to do something in this area of climate or health or nutrition or business for our community. And this RFP checks 3 of those 5 boxes. And I know that if I go to my, para-organizational system or these camcorder videos, it's going to give my team a leg up in terms of getting a timely response put together for that RFP, in terms of hitting our next milestone, in terms of scheduling that brainstorming session, etc. Second, it gives you a feeling of greater confidence that you can move, quickly into grant proposal development or grant implementation, right? So you're taking less time and brain cells coming up with all of the raw material, and now you're basically just getting to sort of regenerate and harvest that material that you've already gathered and organized to make your processes a bit more streamlined. Again, it's still going to take work, right? I'm sure technology is coming that's going to help us with that over the next couple of years. But while we're waiting for that, having some of these systems and having done some of this introspection early on can actually give you a greater advantage in the long term from a time standpoint, from the quality of the work you're putting together and incorporating into grant proposals, etc. Next, I think it gives you questions at the ready, right? As you're going through this process, yeah, you're going to write down a lot of answers or ideas or insights that you have. That's important. It's also going to lead you to new questions, right? Like, what if we were to pursue a project in this area? I never really thought about it that way. Or what about working with this organization that we've had casual conversations with for years, but never actually acted on? Part of this exercise is to sort of go around in the attic of your mind and you sort of sweep a broom around and see what kind of dust and things you might uncover as you're sort of going through these ideas. Again, the process can feel burdensome if you're looking at it you're sort of with an eye for how much time is this going to take me, but the potential value add at the end is all of the new ideas and opportunities it could uncover as you're having these conversations internally and with your colleagues. Another one I think is really important that I've listed here on the bottom row is how you show up the day-to-day work that it requires, whether you're pursuing grant proposals or implementing a project, right? There are often times when I know I am thank you all so much for your patience. I really appreciate it. So being able to be strategic and calm is going to make such a difference because you have, again, these resources at your disposal. Grants, as you know, can be extremely challenging. It can be trying, it can test your patience, it can stress you out. And so the more that you are able to be organized, be calm, and show up for your team in a way that's helpful and productive and compassionate, the more successful you're going to be in the long term. And then finally, we've talked about time savings. Because you've got so much of this information and insight already at your disposal, you'll really be able to focus your creative energy for that next new grant opportunity or project in a way that's going to allow you to bring your best self and bring out the best from your team to the table. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive into some Q&A, and I want to encourage you to write questions in the chat. I think I might have seen a few come through already. I also want to encourage you, if you want to raise your hand or speak out verbally, this is the time to do that, right? This is your time. I want to make sure that we are able to think through these concepts and use them in a way that's as productive for you as possible. And I wondered if we could start with this question of what is the biggest pain point? So think about the work you're doing today as an extension professional. as you're thinking about all the talents or the skills or the opportunities before you, what is the biggest challenge when it comes to auditing your potential to be successful? Let's start with that question. And feel free to drop in comments in the chat as well. Ah, that's a good one. So Zane writes, only so many hours in a day. Absolutely. It is very time. I see Juliana wrote time. Absolutely. That is a real challenge. Ooh, that's a good one. Knowing exactly what the funders are looking for. Absolutely. And while other comments are coming in the chat, maybe I can just speak to a couple of these, Melanie, just to get us started. You know, when it comes to time, I think, um, you know, sometimes it takes us stepping back, as I mentioned earlier, to be able to go further faster. And so, if you can find time, you know, perhaps 5 or 10% of your week, maybe an hour or two here or there, um, to sort of go through this process, right? We've talked about a lot today. Okay, we've talked about doing some self-reflection, perhaps getting together with your team and putting these thoughts down on paper. I want to encourage you to take it sort of piece by piece, right? It doesn't all have to be done today. It doesn't all have to be done this month. And candidly, because you all are here showing up, it tells me that you're already finding success, right? You may not feel successful. Those are two different things, right? You may be successful, but still feel like a failure because there's never enough time. There's always more on your to-do list. And that's definitely true. But I think by going through some of these exercises piece by piece, what you'll start to experience over time is more clarity on where to focus that valuable time, on the activities that maybe you felt like are essential, but maybe don't get you as much value in the long run, etc. Okay. I see also finding time to like debrief everyone on the team, right? So like you're having meetings to recap the meetings. So these things can kind of get out of control. And so I think the more that you can do to, you know, think really critically about everything you can say no to in order to say yes to the handful of things that are most important to you or to your funder, you know, the better off you're going to be. And I know it's easier said than done. We talked earlier about remembering the one thing you never want to do, right? I never want to do this again. It was a terrible experience. You know, identifying things like that and getting clarity as a team and trying to engineer your days, your schedules, your meetings to be as strategic as possible. In terms of recapping things for your team, I mean, you all know this, I'm sure better than I do, but having an agenda, having a specific outcome with a meeting, like we are going to meet to decide on this, and actually reaching that decision is really important, right? Because oftentimes we can meet and then it leads to another meeting and we're still lacking clarity. So I think having some specific outcomes in mind, whether you're sending an email recap or having a meeting, is really important. Another great book. Okay, so there's all kinds of great stuff coming through here. Let me say a couple of things. There's a really great book called Who, Not How. And Dan Sullivan is the author of that book, along with Dr. Benjamin Hardy. I'm just going to type this in the chat. And the reason I'm recommending this book is because there was a comment earlier in the chat about not knowing what a funder is looking for, right? I don't know if they're looking for this or that, or like the RFP is very complex. There's dozens of pages. I don't know where to begin, right? That's a very common thing to experience. If you can find other organizations that have successfully been funded by that agency or gone through this process before, obviously that doesn't apply if it's a brand new opportunity that's never been available. But the premise here is that of that book that I just mentioned and of the process I'm describing is that you're not trying to learn the process yourself. You're trying to find an expert who's been there before. Either they work in the agency, they've been through the process, or they have some sort of requisite expertise or skill set that might help sort of shortcut your learning process. So as often as you can, and again, sometimes it takes a little digging in your network to figure out who has that expertise. But look, try to understand the people who know the system rather than trying to learn the process yourself when possible, because that can save you a lot of time and resources. I want to point out that Melanie has dropped into the chat a link. Extension Foundation is capturing your feedback on today's session, If you wouldn't mind, even while we're on the call today, going ahead and clicking that link that Melanie just dropped in. There's like 3 or 4 questions, very straightforward. In a little bit, I'm going to give you a separate slide where I'm looking for feedback. If you're comfortable giving it, I'd welcome it. Again, no pressure. But go ahead, if you would, please fill out Melanie's, the survey Melanie dropped in that Google Doc, Google form link just a moment ago. Let me look at a couple more comments and then we'll move on to our next question. Having enough time to get all voices heard, yeah, and establishing baseline of goals. So yeah, I mean, I think both of these things that Azula points out are speaking to this idea of getting people on the same page, right? You're trying to make sure that people feel heard, which takes time, right? It takes time in one-on-one conversations or time with group meetings. So I think maybe a couple of ideas might be helpful there. Something I've seen be really effective, especially if you are trying to get feedback, not just from your internal team, but from external partners, is like a monthly roundtable almost. So the way I've seen this done in the past and the way I've handled it based on experts who've been willing to pour into me is that you convene a monthly conversation with people in a specific work function in a project. So for example, I was working on a climate smart grant project, and once a month, all of the communications people would get together. Now this may be different than a lot of what you all are working on, but I'll just give you the example in case it sparks any ideas. So all the communications people get together in a Zoom room, we spend 30 minutes, and as the project, one of the leaders of the project, I would spend a little time going over, okay, here are the next milestones we're looking for. Here's the progress we've made. If we had released any new deliverables, white papers, resources, in my case, we were serving farmers. And so any practical materials that we've been distributing to farmers, for your reference, please distribute these to your teams. Then we would actually move into a roundtable. And I think the magic of the roundtable is not that you're talking about the project itself, but you're getting people to open up and building connections in general. So in this particular case, we actually opened up the floor so that communications leaders from each of our partner organizations, so this was a combination of farmer associations and nonprofits and for-profit companies, they could all share, adjacent projects they were working on that might be of interest to the rest of the group, right? So if we're working on a climate project, maybe company A is working on a water quality issue or a water conservation project in Nebraska that all of us would be interested in. Maybe they're hosting an event or they recorded a video that the rest of us could share on our networks. Someone else might have published a progress report on another project that's very much aligned with what we're working on. And maybe we go take a look at that progress report and get inspiration for how we talk about our project. So again, there are ways to bring people together and encourage conversation that then allows you to talk about some of those bigger picture, deeper issues like establishing baseline goals, right? Like, where are we today and where do we think we can realistically get to? When it comes to setting goals, another thing to keep in mind is that, progress invariably sometimes takes more time than we think. And so being realistic with our milestones, being realistic about the impact that we can have, but again, referencing all of those materials we put together by unlocking our value, you'll start to see patterns and be able to look back at experiences and say, based on our history here, we think it's realistic that we could achieve X. So again, leveraging your team, the people, leveraging those insights you gathered, those can all be helpful when it comes to baseline data, etc. Another point Reagan raises, not having baseline data that you need, whether because it doesn't exist or you don't have ready access to it. Yeah, that's a real problem as well, right? It's a real challenge, not a problem per se, but a limitation. So there, and one of the challenges I think of grants in general is that there are several unknowns at the minimum. And so trying to figure out, okay, what do we know for sure? What are we less sure about, but we hypothesize? And then what's a complete black box? And then from there, if you look at those buckets, right, we know for a fact, we think we know, we hypothesize, and we don't know at all. That may enable you to say, hey, we don't have any data to work from, but we're going to build a case that because of past experience, because of other peer-reviewed research, because of what this technology is capable of, because of the team of experts we've assembled, we believe that X, Y, and Z could be possible. So again, that's not a cure-all, but it might be something that that is helpful to you. Let me look at our comments here. Another comment came in from Gabriella: how to start getting right team members together or convincing them to work on a grant. That is a tricky one, right? Some people are probably going to be really excited right away, and some people may take more convincing. What I found to be effective in my experience in observing, clients and other partners that I've worked with is that it really it takes individual people to stand up and sort of articulate the vision first and foremost, right? I saw visioning come through loud and clear in the comments earlier. So one of the first things you want to think about is who is the right spokesperson for this opportunity, right? So it may be the CEO or the executive or the leader within your extension office, but it may also come from a technical expert, right? A researcher, someone who could say, if we know this funding opportunity exists, here's what we've been working on behind the scenes. If we connected the dots between the two, think of what might be possible. Okay, so it takes, first of all, someone who can sort of connect the dots. Secondly, it takes someone who can communicate that in a compelling way that makes other people excited. And furthermore, doesn't just make them excited, but helps them see how their unique talent and experiences could benefit and help actually make that project a success. How could they help contribute to the outcome you're seeking? And so beginning to socialize those conversations, I think a combination of probably group conversations, but also one-on-one, right? As you're going through this unlocking your value, you're going to start identifying people you really want on the team. You're going to think about their skill sets, and that's going to enable you to have a one-on-one with them casually or formally and say, look, I know what you did on X, Y, and Z projects. Furthermore, I know the kind of person you are and how passionate you are about these topics. Or, you're a technical expert or a wizard in this topic, and we could really benefit, this program outcome could really benefit for someone with your skills. Would you be open to talking about it, right? I think too often as managers and leaders, we try to say, well, here's what we're doing and hope everybody's excited, right? I think the better way to frame it is to say, look, this is what I'm looking for. This is the outcome we're headed toward. We could really use this. Would you be open to a conversation, right? Because what you're looking to do is establish a connection. You're not looking to sell somebody on something yet. My business coach, Ed Gandia, often talks about, building connections, building a relationship before you ever say, hey, I could help you with this project or that project, right? Too often we want to just shortcut and say, let's jump into this project. Everybody, we're going to be spending the next 6 weeks building a proposal, which for some people sounds great, and for many people sounds horrifying, and they want to run from the room. So finding some sort of middle ground is really, really important, I think. Melanie, what questions are coming in? What have I missed, or maybe we want to talk about?
Yeah, we have a few questions in the Q&A that I can read to you. So
Sure.
this one's a two-parter. So this person says, first, I have a dual appointment primarily in ag research, but some extension duties as well. Would you recommend approaching grant writing differently from this point of view, or would it more depend on the source of the grant?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Melanie and Zane. A couple of things. I think it really does depend first and foremost on, well, let me say two things. The first, I think, is that you bring unique perspective as both someone with a research appointment and someone with extension duties, right? The research side and the applied side. And so the fact that you can see both of those worlds gives you a competitive edge when it comes to grants in general. So that's really cool. Secondly, I do think it matters a lot what the funder is looking for, right? So as you know, there are very specifically research-driven RFPs, and there are also very much, like getting into the field and taking that research and putting it to work. So I definitely think your grant writing can draw on both of those skill sets, right? Any proposal needs to draw on examples of peer-reviewed research that provides data and insights that my current project that I'm proposing has value, right? That's sort of grant writing 101. And so I think that research background can really, you can use that lens to get a really solid project narrative that has a really defined methodology and is grounded in the literature. And then on the applied side, on the extension side, I think it's really valuable to be able to say, hey, our organization or our team has worked on these projects. These are the kinds of results we've seen. Maybe you're proposing something new, but maybe you're also proposing something that builds on past successes. And so the fact that you've been able to translate that research into programming and resources and education for a community or a specific client base, again, I think helps you tell that complete story. So I don't think I would think about grant writing differently so much as putting on different hats depending on which section of the grant you're writing to really bring forth that expertise, if that's helpful.
And then the second part of that question, do you have any recommendations for other grant writing resources, if possible, specifically to USDA agencies?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, I don't have a specific resource to recommend off the bat. I mean, there are several organizations that specialize in training grant writers. I've been certified through the American Grant Writers Association, AGWA. I think they have a number of, free resources and articles on their website. There are other organizations that offer trainings and certification on grant writing. I mean, I think realistically, a good, Google search or using an AI tool is probably a great way just to get some insights, broadly speaking. I think spending time studying organizations that have actually, maybe one example I can throw out there. This is a little bit unique, but the recent USDA Climate Smart Commodities grant, Awards. I believe that a lot of those agreements are public record on the USDA website. So if you can find examples like that or other projects that have been successfully funded, I think it's great to sort of look at other successfully funded projects and say, what did they do right here? How did they frame their project, their skill sets in a way that was compelling to the reviewers? And as you all know, there's never a guarantee you're going to get a specific award, but I think studying the masters, so to speak, or even looking back at projects you've had successfully and saying what is similar in these, like what patterns or trends do we see, can be maybe an effective way to at least start thinking about that question. I also see that Donna, thank you, Donna, types in the chat within USDA NEFA, each region usually has a SARE coordinator that's open to questions. So yeah, that's a great point. And a lot of grant proposals, grant offerings, there are people listed that may not be able to answer very granular questions because they don't want to sort of tip the scales or make you think that you're getting favorable treatment, but people who nonetheless can help you understand what reviewers are looking for. Always be sure to review that scorecard that's included in grant offerings to say, here's how the reviewers will weight the proposals. That's a really important pointer, but I'm pretty sure most of you probably already are doing that. While we're wrapping up today, let me just say a couple of things. We've got about 2 minutes left. If you are comfortable giving me feedback, I would be grateful. I think it's really important to be always learning. I know there are ways that I can improve. If there are insights, things that were helpful to you, things you'd like to see more of in the future, let me know. This is separate from the survey Melanie dropped in the chat, so please focus and prioritize on the Extension Foundation Google form. If you have a couple quick seconds, can complete this. You can always scan it on your phone and then come back to it later too. That's more than okay, but I'm grateful. Melanie, are there any other questions or comments that stood out to you that you wanted to call out as we're wrapping up today that I might be able to help with?
I saw in the chat that there was a theme around how to adapt once you start the project to the different team members and then to the what comes up. And I think that's a great plug for the series in general because we'll be discussing that in the next few series.
Yeah, that's a great point, Melanie. Thank you for that observation. That's really critical. Adaptation, resilience, mindsets, all of those things are going to play through in a month's time in mid-May. We're going to come back and talk about ag innovation trends in particular, just to look at one specific industry. But Melanie's right. The world is changing more rapidly than any of us can keep track of. And that plays into our day-to-day work lives as extension professionals. It plays into the industries that you serve, the clients that you're helping. And so, yes, we will definitely be talking about strategies to adapt and to help your team sort of lead through that process so that whether you're building grant proposals and working on fundraising or actively implementing projects, you're not left behind. And you may not be ahead of the curve, but you're certainly on the bubble, right? You're on the curve, sort of being aware of what's going on, but also doing great work in the process and feeling really good about the contributions that you're making. So that's a really great point, Melanie. Thank you. So to Melanie's point, I know Melanie dropped the next event in the chat, but I'll go ahead and take you to this slide. So on May 16th, we'll be back here at 1 o'clock Central talking about navigating ag innovation trends. Please bring your questions and insights. And you can also reach me anytime. I've listed my phone number here as well as my email address. Would love to hear from all of you. And if there's any more granular questions or ideas I could bounce off of you or share with you, or questions I can answer, always very happy to do that. With that, I know we're at time. Thank you so much. And thank you for being flexible with me. You know, I'm a professional and also a dad, and I'm grateful to you all for sticking around as I navigated my personal life. I hope this was helpful to you, and I'm really grateful to Extension Foundation for hosting. Thank you, Extension professionals, for everything you do, and I'll see you back here on May 16th. Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.